Welcome to Science Views from the Valley. I'm your host, Dr. Kelly Kassan. Science Views from the Valley is a monthly program that will explore interesting science topics and how they relate to the San Luis Valley and the Upper Rio Grande region. When I was a young girl growing up in rural Michigan, November was known for deer season nearly as much as it was known for Thanksgiving. So today I would like to talk about deer and deer behavior. Deer belong to the family Cervidae, a group of even-toed ungulates. Ungulates are any animal that has hooves. Some ungulates are odd-toed, meaning they bear their weight on a single toe. This toe would have been the third toe if the other toes had not become vestigial, which means that the toes are much reduced in size and usually non-functional. Odd-toed ungulates include the horses, the rhinoceros, and the tapirs. Deers, however, are even-toed ungulates. They bear their weight on two toes, the third and the fourth. The other three toes, like with the odd-toed ungulates, are now vestigial or missing. To demonstrate what this would be like, take your hand over a flat surface, place all 5 fingers on the surface. Now fold all the fingers except your middle finger. That would be how an odd-toed ungulate would walk. Now place all of the fingers back on the surface and fold them all in except for the middle and the ring finger. That's how an even-toed ungulate would walk. The structure and the placement of these vestigial toe bones is what divides the deer family into 2 main groups: the cervine, which include the elk, the red, and the fallow deer, have these vestigial toes near the wrist bones in the leg. The capreoline, which include the reindeer, moose, the mule, and the white-tailed deer, have vestigial toe bones adjacent to the dew claws. The largest living species of deer is the Alaskan moose, which can reach a weight of 1,800 pounds and a height at the shoulder of nearly 7 feet tall. Though Alaskan moose may seem enormous, there were 2 other deer species that were larger, though they are both extinct. The broad-fronted moose was also approximately 7 feet tall, but reached a weight of 2,200 pounds, making it the heaviest of the known deer species in history. This deer species is estimated to have lived during the Pleistocene epoch, more commonly known as the Ice Age. The broad-fronted moose was one of the Pleistocene megafauna, giant animals that were estimated to weigh over 97 pounds. Thus, the predators of the broad-fronted moose were also megafauna and included dire wolves and several species of bear. The fossils of this gigantic deer are found mainly in northern Europe in the tundra, which is frozen habitat that has no trees, but has shrubs and other short vegetation, grasslands, and swamps. Not surprisingly, broad-fronted moose fossils have not been found in areas that were forested. The large, wide antlers of the broad-fronted moose would have impeded its travel through the thickly branched trees. Like today's moose, the broad-fronted moose seems to have preferred marshy and aquatic vegetation. How do we know what these extinct species ate? Paleobotanists study ancient pollen grains that were found in the same location as the moose fossils. By comparing these ancient pollen grains with the pollen grains of plants that are alive today, paleobotanists can determine the type of plants that were most common where the broad-fronted moose once roamed. What happened to the broad-fronted moose is still a mystery. One theory is that they simply died out as the Ice Age ended, like many of the other megafauna. Another is that the broad-fronted moose continued to evolve and became today's modern moose. How could this happen? Consider the domestic dog. Domestic dogs evolved from ancient Pleistocene wolves, which are now extinct. Over the centuries, man chose certain traits depending on what they needed the dogs to do. Some were bred for hunting, Others were bred for killing pest animals like badgers and rats. Still others were bred for the protection of humans and livestock. And still others were bred solely for companionship. Many of these dog breeds often bear little resemblance to the original wolf ancestor. Yet the domestic dog remains closely related to another descendant of the Pleistocene wolves, the modern gray wolf, so closely related that they can interbreed easily and produce fertile hybrids. In the case of the domestic dog, humans exerted the pressure that determined which dog traits would be passed down to future generations. But nature can also exert pressure on certain traits. Some traits continue to be passed down to offspring because they either provided a benefit that increased their survival and/or reproduction, or simply did not have a detrimental effect on the species and thus were not weeded out. This process, natural selection, can also result in modern species looking and behaving very differently from the original ancestral species. Now that we have talked a bit about the largest deer, what are the smallest species of deer? The smallest deer is the tiny poodoo deer, which lives in South America. Poodoo deer are 14 inches high and weigh only 20 pounds, making them approximately the size of a large domestic cat. These tiny deer are often hard to find since they are solitary animals that live in dense underbrush and bamboo thickets. This behavior reduces their risk of being found and killed by predators. Probably the most striking characteristic of deer are the antlers. Antlers are unique to the deer family. They are made of true bone and are a single structure. This is what makes antlers different from horns, which are two structures, the bone core and the keratin sheath. This feature of horns is why you can find hollow cattle and bison horns for sale, but not hollow deer horns. Another difference between antlers and horns is that antlers are always shed annually, while horns are never shed by the animal and can continue to grow throughout the animal's life. Only cervids, deer, grow true antlers. Though pronghorns have horns that look like antlers, these horns are actually a thin blade of bone covered with keratin. Pronghorns are neither cervids nor bovine. Their nearest relatives are actually giraffes and the okapi, which are the short-necked giraffes. In most deer species, the males are the ones that have the antlers. This is due to antler growth being stimulated by androgens, particularly testosterone. Male and female reindeer, however, both sport antlers. Female reindeer are able to grow antlers due to genetic mutations that allow the antler formation receptors to be even more sensitive to androgens. So even the low amount seen in females can cause the antlers to grow. Male reindeer always shed their antlers in late fall or early winter, but female reindeer will retain their small antlers until they calve in the late spring or early summer. Some females in other deer species will also grow small antlers due to a higher than normal level of testosterone or a genetic abnormality that causes hermaphrodism. Antlers come in three forms. The thick palmate antlers, so called because the antlers are broad with small fingerling spikes projecting along the edges. The more commonly seen antlers are the dendritic antlers, which branch off into smaller spikes. These resemble tree branches, which is what the word dendritic means. And finally, some deer species have just small spikes. So what are the function of deer antlers? Since in nearly all deer species, the males are the one that sport antlers, the obvious hypotheses are that antlers are used to fight with other males for available females and/or female sexual selection. Sexual selection is when one sex prefers a certain characteristic in the opposite sex. If that characteristic is controlled by genes, we begin to see more and more of that particular characteristic in future generations. The classic example is peacock tails. Female birds, like peahens, prefer very long tails on male birds. When they mate with males with long tails, the long-tailed genes are passed down to the next generation, and each succeeding generation of peacocks have longer and longer tails. I will be discussing sexual selection in my February show. Some female deer in certain species do prefer larger racks. The most extreme example of sexual selection in deer would be the now extinct Irish elk. These elk were found across northern Europe and Asia from Ireland to Siberia. Irish elk weight was approximately 1,500 pounds, and they stood at nearly 7 feet at the shoulders. This makes the Irish elk slightly taller than the modern Alaskan moose and about the same weight. But the antlers of the Irish elk were much larger. Some Irish elk antlers had a span of 12 feet from tip to tip. If you come across a set of Irish elk antlers, and some are still found today, they would not fit in the long bed of a pickup truck. The modern moose antlers have a span that is half the size of the Irish elk antlers, only about 6 feet across. Though the large antlers may have helped male Irish elk catch the ladies, the antlers greatly hampered their ability to escape predators. To make things worse, male Irish elk would have had to eat enormous amounts of food to provide enough energy to grow the antlers every year. Scientists estimate that the average bull Irish elk would have had to eat 88 pounds of vegetation daily in order to support the growth of their antlers. These factors most likely contributed to their extinction. Another hypothesis for why most deer have antlers is protection against predators like wolves. Wolves in Yellowstone National Park, for example, are 3.6 times more likely to attack a male deer that is without antlers than one that has antlers. Likewise, half of all male elk killed by wolves are without antlers, even in seasons when most males have antlers. Reindeer, as we have learned, are the only deer species where both males and females have antlers. Though this oddity appears to be a result of a genetic mutation, it was a beneficial mutation. Reindeer of both sexes are seen using their antlers to clear away snow so they can eat the vegetation underneath. This reduces the chance of starvation during the winter months. A benefit of palmate antlers, which we see in moose, is that it gives them a hearing advantage. A study of moose hearing in 2008 found that moose sporting antlers have more sensitive hearing than moose without antlers. Female moose are known to have a greater variety of vocalizations than the males, indicating that vocal communication is important among the moose. So what deer are native to Colorado? Colorado is the home for 4 species of deer: the elk, the moose, the mule deer, and the white-tailed deer. According to Colorado Park and Wildlife, Colorado is home to approximately 3,000 moose, mainly in northern Colorado. Walden, Colorado, was declared by the state legislature to be the moose viewing capital of Colorado. Moose are the largest living species of deer, but despite their size, they are strictly vegetarians and eat mainly brush, willows, and aquatic vegetation. Since willows are also found near bodies of water, moose are more likely to be found in these habitats rather than terrestrial habitats. Moose are one of the least social deer. They only form groups when mating. The moose will go their separate ways after the breeding season has completed. Moose breed in late summer and early fall, and the moose cows give birth in late spring and early summer. Moose often have twins if food is plentiful. Triplets have also been documented. The average lifespan of a moose is approximately 20 years. Moose have very poor eyesight, but very good hearing. As we heard earlier, the antlers help. They also have an excellent sense of smell. They are also very good swimmers, a useful skill for an animal that often feeds on aquatic vegetation. Elk are far more plentiful than moose. In fact, Colorado has the largest elk population in North America, with approximately 280,000 elk. Elk are heavier than mule or white-tailed deer. Male elk reach weights of approximately 1,200 pounds, while the females reach weights of nearly 630 pounds. Elk eat primarily grass, but will switch to tree bark in the winter. Unlike the solitary moose, elk tend to form same-sex groups until the fall. To attract mates, bull elk rub their own urine into their fur. They do this by building wallows in which they urinate and roll in. They also spray urine onto their fur. Strangely enough, female elk are attracted to these smelly and rather unhygienic bulls. Female elk, called cows, are also attracted to males that have the loudest and most frequent bugling. Bugling is the screams of the bull elk looking for mates. Female elk typically give birth to a single calf. White-tailed deer are also found in Colorado, though mainly in the areas east of the Rocky Mountains. The white-tailed deer is the species that Bambi was based on. Originally, Walt Disney wanted to base the story on the mule deer that he saw in California, but the scriptwriter convinced him that the white-tailed deer would be recognized by more Americans. White-tailed deer prefer the flatter, more wooded bottomlands over alpine habitats. They are often found in edge habitats, where they can forage in the open lands but have wooded areas nearby in which they can hide. White-tailed deer are opportunistic browsers and will consume more than 610 different plant species, including cacti and other succulents. In the fall, male deer, called bucks, will begin preparing for mating by rubbing the soft velvet off their antlers and leaving the strands hanging on shrubs and trees as a way to mark their territory. The bucks will then paw the earth, building a scrape, where they will urinate in order to leave a scent to attract females. Males will also begin sparring with each other as the does judge their strength. When the female does enter estrus, the bucks will chase them prior to mating. Does determine a male's fitness by how long and how far he can chase her. These chases can cover miles and may last days. If the female chooses to mate with the male, he will then spend a few days guarding her against other males. Not surprisingly, bucks are exhausted after the mating season is completed and often will sleep for several days to regain their energy. They also begin to eat heavily since they eat very little during the breeding season and have lost a lot of weight. If they are unable to regain the weight, their chances of surviving the winter are considerably lower. The does will give birth in the spring. Young does will typically give birth to one fawn, where the older does will give birth to 2 and sometimes 3 fawns. Does are very protective of their offspring and leave them in a well-hidden spot until the fawns are able to follow their mother to feeding spots. Fawns are usually able to follow their mother in approximately 4 weeks after birth. Here in Alamosa, you are more likely to find mule deer. Though they look similar to white-tailed deer, their ears are larger and set further apart. Mule deer also tend to be larger than the white-tailed deer, with a darker grayish-brown fur rather than the reddish-brown fur seen in the whitetails. Mule deer, unlike the other deer species, tend to stot when they run. Stotting is when all 4 legs of the animal is lifted off the ground simultaneously, giving the animal a bouncing type of gait. Colorado is home to an estimated 400,000 mule deer. Like the white-tailed deer, mule deer mate in the fall. Dominant bucks will gather several does to form a harem and will aggressively defend their harems from other males in the area. Large bucks that have the largest antlers typically attract the most does. Last year, I saw a buck with 3 does that fed near my house in Alamosa. He had only one antler, so he may have had a few run-ins with other males interested in his harem. Mule deer does give birth in the spring and typically have twins, though they are known to have as many as 4 fawns in a litter. The higher number of fawns is necessary, since wildlife biologists have reported that the survival rate of mule deer fawns is approximately 50%. Though predation and winter starvation has an impact on the size of the deer population, chronic wasting disease is also a very serious problem. Chronic wasting disease affects all 4 deer species in Colorado, though it appears to be more of a problem in mule, white-tailed deer, and elk. Chronic wasting disease is a prion disorder, similar to mad cow disease and the sheep disease scrapie. The disease, like all prion diseases, are always fatal. Prions are brain proteins that are misshapen due to an incorrect folding, which not only renders them non-functional, but also makes them infectious. When these abnormal brain proteins touch normal brain proteins, the prion causes the normal protein to refold into the abnormal prion shape. This leads to a chain reaction that causes more and more normal proteins to misfold into prions. These prions are extremely resistant to destruction by enzymes or normal degradation. Chronic wasting disease is a very contagious disorder among deer. Fecal matter with prions contaminate vegetation, and the prions can then be passed to deer eating the contaminated plants. Infected deer are also known to transmit prions to non-infected deer through saliva. Chronic wasting disease became a severe problem in Wisconsin, which was forced to establish a 287 square mile zone in 2002 and eradicated approximately 15,000 deer within that zone in order to reduce the spread of chronic wasting disease. Chronic wasting disease also has an economic impact. Elk and deer farms have found it difficult to sell meat to foreign nations due to the fears of prion disorders. Though mad cow disease was found to be transmitted to humans, particularly if the person ate beef brains, very few records exist that link the eating of venison to human prion disease. Despite this rarity, health and wildlife officials do advise caution against eating venison if the animal was killed in an area known to have chronic wasting disease. In December, we will have the Geminid meteor showers. The Geminids are one of the best annual meteor showers, often exhibiting 120 meteors per hour at its peak. The Geminid meteors are the result of debris left by the passing of asteroid 3200 Phaeton. 3200 Phaeton was discovered in 1983 and was designated as an Apollo asteroid. Apollo asteroids are asteroids that are known to cross the Earth's orbit. In 2017, the Earth came within 20 million kilometers of the asteroid. 3200 Phaeton is categorized as a potentially hazardous asteroid due to its size and the fact that its orbit intersects with the Earth's orbit. But we will not have to worry about this asteroid in our lifetimes. Due to its consistent, stable orbit, astronomers estimate that 32 Phaeton will not collide with the Earth for at least 400 years. The meteor shower is expected to reach its peak on the evening of December 13th until the dawn of December 14th. Since there will be a new moon on that night, skies will be particularly dark, which will make for good meteor viewing. I would like to thank my KRZA listeners for sharing your Thanksgiving morning with me today. My next show will be on December 24th, when I will be speaking about bioluminescence, the why and how animals and other organisms can light up like Christmas trees using specialized pigments and enzymes. Have a happy Thanksgiving, and I hope you will tune in next month.